In this video, we're going to wrap up our discussion of command line arguments by setting up Yargs to support some options for each of our commands. For example, the add command needs the title and body of the note you're adding. The remove command needs the title of the note you're trying to remove. And last up, our read command, it needs the title of the note you're trying to read. So we have to figure out how to configure options for those three commands, and the answer is that we set up another property on the configuration object we pass to command. This property, which I'm going to add right here after describe, is called builder. Builder's value is an object, and on that object, we can define all of the options we want this given command to support. Now, in the case of add, once again, there's two, title and body. Let's start with title. To define a new option, we set it up as a property on the builder object. So if I want to be able to provide a title when I run the add command from the terminal, I can set up title right here in builder. Now the value for this property is an object, and in here we can customize how that option works. And the first thing we're going to do is set up the describe property, just like we did for our command up above. Describe for an option allows us to describe that option. And right here, I'm just going to say note title, perfect. With our option defined, we can now access that in the command handler down below, and we get access to the arguments via this first argument that's provided to our function. So we give this function to Yargs, and when the command is executed, Yargs runs the function and it calls it with argv, which contains all of those arguments. Let's go ahead and print that to the terminal so we can see what we get. Right here, after our string, I'm going to pass a second argument to console.log, and the second argument is just going to be the argv variable. Now we can save things and run our application from down below. What we're going to do is run node app.js add. We are going to provide that title option, and I'll set it equal to something like shopping list. I'm going to run the command, and what do I get? Right here, we have our console.log printing, adding a new note, followed by argv from inside of the handler. And right here, we have the title property with shopping list, which means we have access to argv.title, which we can now use to actually define a note. Now, one thing to point out is that these are not required, which means that I could run the command without title. Node app.js add. If I do that, what do I get? Things still seem to work even though no title was provided. Now it's up to us as the developers to decide whether or not a given option should be required. If it's not, you can leave the configuration as is. If you want it to be required, you can set that up as well. Right here, we have the demand option property. This is set to false by default. We can go ahead and flip that over to true, meaning that you have to provide it in order for the command to work correctly. Now let's try to run the script again without providing title, even though it's now required. When I do that, what do I get? I get an error message printing. It's saying we are missing required arguments and it lists them out. In this case, we are missing title. Right here, it even shows the available options for the add command, and we can see that we have title as the last one, and it is indeed shown as required over here on the right-hand side, which is correct. Now, the other thing we want to make sure is that we always get a string value for this particular option. So if you provide the option, but you don't give it a value, it's going to show up as a Boolean. Let's see what I mean by that. Node app.js add. Here we will use -- title, but I'm not going to set it equal to a string like we did previously. If I do this, we can see the value for title is true, which is not what we want. I want to make sure that the argv.title property is always a string. We can go ahead and enforce that by setting up another property on our little options object configuration. Right here, it is a type, and we're going to set the value equal to one of the supported types, which is string in lowercase. Now that we have this in place, we are always going to have a string value for title, and it's required, which means it's always going to be there. Now, it could be an empty string, but that's okay. We can always perform a little validation later on to make sure the title has content. But if I rerun that previous command, we can see that at least we have a string value for title instead of a Boolean, which is a great step in the right direction. And obviously, if I provided a string equals something like my title, that's going to show up right there, which is indeed ideal. So now we have this title option. We have a description for it. We've said that it needs to be provided, and we've said that we're always expecting a string, which is awesome. You'll notice in the terminal that we're getting the args printed twice because we print them once inside of the command handler for add, and then down below we print them again in a little console.log call. It's important to note that this is actually doing something. If we were to comment this line out and save the program, it wouldn't work as expected. If I rerun the exact same command, which worked a few moments ago, we can see we're not getting any output. So how exactly is printing the args making all of this work? Well, when we access the argv property on Yargs, Yargs knows to actually do its thing and parse those arguments. Now, if we don't need to access it, that can be less than ideal, so there's another way to get that done. It is yargs.parse. It doesn't take any arguments, and we can just call it like that. If we save the program and we rerun the command, now things are working once again, and we're seeing our arguments printed just a single time. So Yargs parse actually goes through the process of parsing the arguments with all of the configuration details you've provided with your Yargs command calls up above. It's almost challenge time, but before we get there, we are going to print the title explicitly down below as opposed to printing the entire object. So I'll remove our console.log and replace it with a new one. And I'm going to print two things. First up, I'm going to print a little title for the title. So I'll say something like title : space, and then I'll concatenate on the actual title value, which is on argv.title, where the title property matches up with the title property we chose to create up above. Now, if I run the script again, things are just a bit more organized right here. Title, my title is showing up. So now let's talk about what I'd like you to do as your challenge for the video. As always, I have some challenge comments right here describing what I'd like you to do. It is going to be your goal to add a new option to Yargs, and that's going to be for the add command. So right here, you're going to use what you've learned in the video to set up a body option for the add command, which means you'll be customizing the builder object we have right here, adding a second property. You're going to configure the body option to have a description. You can pick something that makes sense for you. You're going to make it a required option. We're going to need a body, and you're going to force it to be a string using the correct definition. Next up, you're going to log the body value in the handler function like we log the title down below. And finally, you're going to test your work. So you're going to run the command from the command line a few times. Try it once without providing the body and make sure that fails. Try it again while providing the body and make sure you see both your title and body printing. So all you need to do is edit this object, add some stuff inside of this function, and test things out from the command line. All right, take some time to knock that one out. As always, we're going to work through the solution together. So take a moment to pause the video, and when you're done, come back and click play. How'd that go? Let's kick things off together. We're going to be setting up a new body option, which means we need to add a new property onto the builder object. I could add it before or after title. Either way works. I'm just going to add it right afterwards. Right here, the new property is called body. It is also going to have its value be an object like we did for title, and this is where we can customize it. So we want to set up a description. I want to make it required, and I want to make it a string. For the description, we use our handy describe property. I'll use a description of something like note body for this one. Then we're also going to require it by setting demand option equal to true. Remember, the default value is false. Finally, I'm going to set the type for this one equal to a string, so we always get a string value provided. So that's steps 1 and 2. Next up, you needed to log the value in the handler. So down here, we log out the title. I'm going to add a new console.log call to log out the body. So body : space. Then I'll concatenate on argv.body, where the body property comes from the same value as the name up above. Now that we have all of this in place, we can move on to the final step, which is to test our work and make sure we can now use body successfully. I'm going to save app.js. I am going to clear the terminal output just to give us a little bit of thinking space so it's not so cluttered, and we're going to use our new command. So node app.js, I am going to run add, and I'm going to do it with title. I'll provide a title. I'll just use a title like by, and I'm not going to provide a body, and that's intentional. When I do this, I'm expecting it to fail, and it does. Right here, missing a required argument body. I can see both title and body showing up, both required, which is fantastic. The next thing we're going to do is rerun the exact same command, but this time we are going to provide a body. So after a space, hyphen body equals, right here inside of double quotes, these are what I need to buy, period. Now, if we go ahead and run this command, what do we see? We see our two messages. I have the title console.log right here printing buy. That comes from line 33. And I have body. These are the things I need to buy coming from line 34. So there we go. That is it for the challenge. Our add command now takes in all of the options necessary for it to actually create a new note and save it to a data store. Figuring out how we're going to save our data, how we're going to save our notes is the topic of the very next video. So let's go ahead and jump right in to the next one.